Hi, I'm Hannah Absalom.
And I'm Alex Absalom.
And today's video, we're going to be talking about when you're praying for healing, why don't you pray if it be your will? That is something we get asked a lot when we're teaching on healing, because we say, don't say if it be your will when you're praying. And people will say, why? Because of course, we're all wanting to do the will of the Father. And we think, well, it's biblical surely to pray if it's your will. But anyway, we're going to dive into that a little bit. Alex, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, I think clearly if you're a believer, then you want to do God's will. You want to know what his will is. You want to obey it. You want to live it out. I think what Jesus does is to help us along the way is he gives us some standing orders. And a standing order is something which in the military, say, or in a business or an organisation, that's what your default posture is. That's what we expect you to do every time, unless there's something explicitly said to the contrary. So Jesus' standing orders are love your neighbour, that you would pray, that you would share the good news. And one of those standing orders is heal the sick. And he says it again and again and again. He models it throughout his life. It's crystal clear he wants us to do that. But I think also there are some things that God has reserved that he wants to do, but he wants us to ask him for those things. And that's a kind of general prayer principle. That's one of the reasons why we do pray. And I think maybe that might come into play sometimes in the healing stuff as well, that we actually have to partner with him. He's looking for partners, sons and daughters, not slaves, to step into the opportunities that he's laid before us as well.
Another thing that I would say is, as Christians, if we are called to live a life of surrender, then it should almost be a basic posture of who we are and how we live, is that we're continually almost praying that bit of the Lord's Prayer, your kingdom come, your will be done. And we should be living that out. So to pray that again every time we're praying, particularly in a healing situation, I don't think it's necessary. So I think that should be our basis for performing an awful lot of stuff and not something we have to keep going back to. And actually, I think you could argue that God is not going to answer a prayer that is against his will anyway. So to an extent, it's a redundant prayer because he's only going to answer those prayers that he wants to see happen. The other thing that I always think is that if you're starting by praying for someone for healing and you are just saying, Lord, we bring this person to you, da, 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 and Lord, if it's your will, we just pray that they would be healed. To my mind, as soon as you say that, you are bringing in an element of doubt of...
that's good.
Of, well, maybe it isn't the Lord's will, so maybe it's not going to happen. So let's come from the posture of it is the Lord's will and we want to see this happen.
That's great. Fantastic.
So would you say it's always the Lord's will to heal? Because healing doesn't always happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff you could put in there. So I would say a few things, no particular order. Firstly, I'd say look at the life of Jesus. Throughout the Gospels, he's healing. And he never turns anyone away who comes to him for healing. So his posture was always, yes, I'd love to heal you. I think I would remember that the big goal that Jesus is up to is relationships. So he is seeking to draw us back to the Father, into the family relationships there. So, for instance, in John, I think it's John 5:19, he says, the Son only does what he sees the Father doing. And so what that means is if Jesus only does what he sees the Father doing, and he only does the will of the Father, and Jesus does healing, that for me would suggest that the will of the Father is to see healing, that's his posture towards us. He's a good Father. He wants health and wholeness and healing for his children. Third thing I would say would be, I might go to somewhere like Isaiah 53:4, where it talks about the cross prophetically, but one of the phrases in there is that by his wounds or by his stripes, in old language, we are healed. And so there's something about what happens at the cross where we get to experience the healing that's normative in heaven. You talked about the kingdom of heaven coming now. we get to experience that today. You know, that you look at Jesus, there's a clue in his name. His name is, Jesus literally means Yahweh, or God is salvation, or God saves. And that salvation definitely includes forgiveness of sins. It's definitely absolutely anchored in that. But it's more than that. Salvation is about God holistically wants to redeem everything. And that includes society, and, you know, that's why Jesus, when you're sick, he heals you. When you're oppressed by the enemy, he brings deliverance. When you're hungry, he feeds you. When there's justice issues, he seeks to overturn those things that are evil in society. So he does all that stuff, and that includes he's interested in seeing our bodies made whole in how we operate. And I think finally, I would say Jesus is never stoic about sickness. He never goes, "Oh well, Hannah, I'd love to heal you, but it's just not your time," or "It's going to be good for your character, sister, when you've gone through another 3 months of suffering." He doesn't do that. And yet we say these things to people in God's name, and we ascribe awfulness to the nature and the character of God, which is the complete antithesis of God as a loving father. So to answer your question, I think God's posture towards sickness is he hates it. Jesus hates cancer more than any of us do, and all the other awful diseases. He wants to see us healthy and whole. Now, the counterbalance to that is we live in the not yet as well as the now of the kingdom. We don't always get to see everything happen as we would wish. I think also this side of eternity, there might be certain occasions which are the exception, but where God doesn't want to bring healing. And the most obvious is where someone is at the time of their dying, their days that God has ordained for them are up. And so clearly the role is not so much physical healing, it's preparation of that person for going to eternity. And there might be one or two other scenarios, but those things would be, to my mind, those are the exception. I think our posture is, I'm expecting that God wants to heal, because those are his standing orders, unless he really makes clear something else is going on here.
So you're saying that basically we don't need special permission to heal the sick. We just go for it. We assume that God wants to, unless he specifically says otherwise. Yes. And if it doesn't happen, Jesus seems to instruct us that the issue is either a faith issue, and I think what we've discovered is that's often the faith of the community around that person, or it's a perseverance issue. Sometimes we just have to battle and fight and fight and fight. And we could tell lots of stories of people who it's taken months or years for them to get the healing, but they will get a dramatic healing through the Lord. But for whatever reason, frustratingly, it just seems to take time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think there's this tension that's going on there. That, you know, that God is at work, that we recognise that not everything happens as we want, but nevertheless our posture is we believe that God's will is to heal.
Mm-hmm. And therefore we do not say when we are praying, "If it be your will," we just assume it.
Correct, because it's a cop-out, and it, like I said earlier, it reduces faith, and I think it demonstrates a misunderstanding of the character of God and our relationship with him. So we're not meant to. I think it's deeply unhelpful. As soon as we build our theology around our lack of experience, we get ourselves into massive trouble, and that's what. Sorry, forgive me if this is your theological worldview, but I think that's what cessationism does. To me, it's a 19th century heresy. It wasn't in the early church at all, but it's basically trying to take our lack of experience of the supernatural and somehow build a theology around it. And yet, when you look at the scriptures, Jesus doesn't give us that option. Jesus says he ties, heal the sick, drive out demons, proclaim my kingdom. He says that again and again in how he sends us out. Sometimes he throws in raise the dead. And he knits them together. And so for us to somehow pull them apart and go, well, we're just going to do the talking bit, is nonsense. I mean, it's completely against the scriptures, and it's against the experience of Christians down the millennia, and yet somehow we think that's acceptable to do. We as Westerners are so poor in our faith in these areas. We have to learn to lean into this, and that's why the discipline, what it represents of committing to say, I'm not going to say if it be your will. That represents a posture of heart that we're saying, I want to step into this greater faith and boldness that the Lord has for us.
Yeah. Okay, so we always want to make this very practical, give you homework or whatever. So we want to say to you, our challenge is, do not say or do not include the words, if it be your will, while you're praying for the sick over the next few months, but be bolder when you're praying and just assume it is God's will. And see if you see any difference in results or whatever. Let us know, give us feedback as to how that goes. But we want to just encourage you to be bold. We want to encourage you to take every opportunity to pray for someone who says, I'm sick, and just pray with them, whether they're Christians, whether they're not. People are so open to this. Our son was just telling us a few minutes ago, he prayed for a co-worker and they texted back, said, I don't normally believe in this religious stuff, but I'm better. So we just want to encourage you and share your stories with us because it encourages us. Thank you.
Okay, God bless you. Have fun playing with this.